Hi everyone, we're so glad that you've joined us at the Center for Brain Health for our event. Let's get started with a brief video underscoring the importance of brain health for you and for society. After that, we'll introduce our speaker.
We work, we live, we innovate and create. At the center of it all is your brain health. The ability to solve problems, think analytically, share empathy, and thrive.
We're trying to make brain performance really the next fitness revolution.
So how do you boost brain power? Welcome to the Brain Health Project, an urgent call to transform your mind to work stronger and faster.
This is an absolute crisis, as great as any we have ever faced. We have to equip the minds and brains of our citizens to cope with the accelerating, dizzying rate of change that they face in their lives.
Your brain health is not fixed. Scientific discoveries prove it can adapt and grow regardless of your starting point.
Our greatest value, the asset that will help us to change everything, every problem we're in, is all in our head.
To harness that treasure, we must measure and monitor progress while things are going well versus waiting for an injury or disease to strike.
Too many of us are outliving our brains, and that does not have to be the case.
The information age is bombarding us with more content than our human brains can handle. How do you keep from getting lost in this? And focus on deep thinking. For starters, stop multitasking.
Science shows us that multitasking is bad for your brain. It reduces fluid intelligence, causes brain atrophy, and increases chronic stress.
The global pandemic is creating more stress than ever, stress that leads to depression and anxiety and beyond. Unlocking our potential to navigate these hurdles starts with learning the right strategies, even in school.
So when teachers have these strategies, they're empowered to support our learners, and then the learners are now able to take ownership of their learning.
Training kids how to think is doubling academic achievement among middle schoolers.
I think the greatest national security threat is pre-K through 12. If we don't take care of educating our young men and women, then we have to ask ourselves, where are we going to be in 20 years?
Our world-renowned scientists know you can increase your brain health, not lose it. It's time for a new category of health, brain health. You are a game changer. Ready to transform the world with us? Be a part of the brain health revolution. It starts here.
On behalf of everyone at the Center for Brain Health, welcome to Frontiers of Brain Health, where we take a deep dive into the most exciting new developments in brain research. I'm Dr. Jeremy Gray, Director of Information Technology and a former research scientist. For those of you who don't know much about us, the Center for Brain Health is a cognitive neuroscience research center at the University of Texas at Dallas. We've dedicated the last 3 decades to exploring neuroplasticity and the brain's amazing lifelong potential to learn and get stronger. Stay until the end of the video to hear about our groundbreaking research study, the Brain Health Project. We'll also have time for questions, both from people in the room here in the Ellipse at the Center for Brain Health, as well as our online audience. So today I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Yune Lee, our speaker. He's an assistant professor here at UT Dallas. He's both a scientist and a musician and a really cool guy. He started his career at Samsung in Seoul, South Korea, where he was involved in broadcasting and marketing. He then joined a commercial music studio where he's involved in seeing the power of music on the human mind and body. This interest led him to pursue a PhD in cognitive neuroscience at Dartmouth University, and then a postdoc at the University of Pennsylvania. After a brief stop at Ohio State University in 2020, He joined at UTD as assistant professor in the Department of Speech, Language, and Hearing. His research has been, he's the director of the Speech, Language, and Music, or SLAM Laboratory. His research has been funded by numerous grants, including National Institute of Health, National Science Foundation, Parkinson's Foundation, Aware in Dallas, and Friends of Brain Health. Dr. Lee was one of the first recipients of the NIH's new initiative, Music and Health. His research has received numerous media mentions, including the US News and World Report. So I'm very pleased to introduce to you Dr. Lee.
Thanks, Jeremy, for the nice introduction. Everybody hears me okay over there? Okay, all right, so. All right, before I begin, I just want to let you know that I have no personal or financial relationship with a BMW. I'm not here to sell the car, the German automobile, but here I'm here to tell you some stories and some research findings demonstrating how powerful music is on human mind and body. All right. Okay, so let me go ahead and get started. All right. So what do you guys say about these individuals here? Anybody? What are they doing? Huh? Listening to music. How do they feel?
Happy or full.
Right, they're happy, right? They move. Yes, so, all right, so music makes us move, makes us put a smile on our face, makes us happy. Now the question is how and why, right? So that could be kind of difficult question, but the reason why we can move and we can be happy by music is because music triggers the dopaminergic system in the brain. Okay, so I'm sure that you guys heard about dopamine, right? The ubiquitous neurotransmitter, that's really important for our emotion regulation and also our movement. Now, when you listen to your favorite songs, right, then you have a shot of poison. I'm sorry, shot of dopamine. Yeah, a shot of poison is a song by Lira Ford. Sticking in my head, you guys know that song? Give me one shot of poison. Sorry, I don't know why shot of poison came out, but shot of dopamine. Okay. I guess I'm a little nervous. The next slide. All right, so here what we see is the PET image. So way of diagnosing Parkinson's disease, okay? On the left side, we have a PET image that is highlighting the dopaminergic system, the deeper layer of the brain. You see the bright spot over there called the basal ganglia. Okay, and on the right side, you see the PET image of a Parkinson's patient, right? Compared to this, you know, the boundary is less clear and color is opaque, right? That means that there's a lack of dopamine. This is a way of diagnosing lack of dopamine, deficiency of dopamine. For some unknown reasons, dopaminergic cells die. We're still trying to figure it out. But that gives this Parkinson's disease. Now let me play this little video where you can see how music actually can change Parkinson's patients' movement drastically. Okay.
But watch what happens when we start the music.
inside the brain.
Inability to control their own body's movement until the music comes in. And the movement begins to flow, and with joy, they can dance.
If you can give a person with Parkinson's joy, that's a gift.
So music is hardwired to make us move.
All right. So we know that Parkinson's patients have trouble moving. They're also quite depressed, right, because of this comorbidity. But actually, not many people know that they also have a speech and language impairments. So here's one study that was done by German group. There's a little cut here, but citation. So in this study, they recruited Parkinson patients, and then they did this EEG study where they put caps, and then they can measure the EEG signals from the brain. And while they're doing it, they also present a bunch of short German sentences, right? And then half of them actually grammatically correct, but the other half are wrong. So for example, in English version, it would be like, instead of I want to go to school, it could be I want to school go. And then you readily realize that, oops, there's a, there's wrong in the sentence, right? So typically we have no trouble recognizing it, but Parkinson patients actually have a difficulty detecting those syntactically wrong sentences. What you see here is whether they were presented with syntactically correct or wrong sentences. The brain EEG signal actually elicited very similar responses. Now, so you guys see that it's not much. Now, for the same patients, Parkinson's patients, this time, they play a very rhythmically, like very well organized song, like a march music, right? Bam, 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 rhythmically very pronounced for 3 minutes. And then the patients do this task again. And there's delay. What happened here is, in response to the march priming, their brain actually shows what's called the P600 component. That's the hallmark of syntactic violation. Whenever we detect a sentence with wrong syntax, then the brain will generate this signal called the P600, right? So the researcher went ahead and asked more questions. Okay, is that rhythm specific or music in general effect? So they had another control experiment where this time the patients were primed by music that doesn't have any rhythmic track, right? It's like a piano waltz song. There's no rhythm drumming. And then what happened was this P600 is now gone. Okay, so they concluded that this is because of rhythm in the music, right? Now, yeah, so inspired by that, the study, we decided to offer this class called the DDR class. So DDR, I'm sure you heard about this acronym many times, but it doesn't stand for Dance Dance Revolution this time. It actually stands for Drum Dance Rehab, okay? So we offer this small class. And then during the time, it's a 3-week course program. And during the time, they learn how to drum. And there's going to be sit-down drumming, but also they stand up and use the hand drum and they dance with the rhythm. So the idea is to combine the two most well-known therapy regimens, namely drumming and dancing, to intensify the dopamine release. And see if that exercise, everyday exercise 5 days a week for 3 weeks long, it's a short period, but it's intense. Would that actually improve their cognitive, language, or music abilities? And here's what we got. Then we had 4 patients for the first class. As you can see, it's a pre and post. Start with different baseline. Some are actually pretty good, where some others pretty bad. But nonetheless, you see all the increase in music, language, and working memory score. Some didn't really improve. Again, so that was kind of feasibility study, and it was kind of encouraging. So as we were actually offering the second DDR class with even bigger participants, guess what happened? The pandemic, 2020. So we had to, unfortunately, we had to stop that program. Hopefully we can resume it someday in the future. Okay. So, so why the rhythm actually improves grammar in language? Why there's this connection? Well, what you see here, the top row is it's called the multislice brain image, where you can see the areas that are lighting up when you are comparing grammatically or syntactically difficult condition to the easy condition. Then you get to see all these areas, including this Broca's area, famous region, right, and the Wernicke's area. But also notice the bright spot in the middle. You probably remember the dopaminergic system in the PET image in the previous slide. So you see this bright spot in the middle. So that's a basal ganglia system. Now down here, this is a rhythm network, okay? So again, you see this basal ganglia, right, dopaminergic system. So what's in common between the two? Those are this basal ganglia, right? So you can see this neural overlap there. Now, sorry, there's a delay in clicker. Given we see this neural overlap, it is conceivable to see some behavioral overlap between grammar in language and the rhythm skill in music early on in life. So we decided to bring children aged between 7 and 17, school-age kids, and then basically we gave them 2 tests, okay? So let me walk through that quickly. Maybe I'll use, maybe I'll just hear you. All right, so here, this is what's called the Auditory Sentence Comprehension Task. It's one of the tests that kids actually perform. So they were presented with a bunch of short English sentences, okay? And here's some example, right? And when they are actually presented with those, they're required to indicate who is performing the action, with a boy or a girl. Okay, so let's quickly go through this. So here's an example here. As you can see, between the 2 examples, they all have the same identical 6 words, right? So brothers that hug sisters are good, and the down here brothers that sisters hug are good. Okay. Now there, the task is to indicate which gender, right? So for this one, it is a boy, right? Because the brothers is the one who hugged the sisters, right? That's pretty easy for kids. Now, this sentence is actually a lot harder for them, not only for kids actually throughout the lifespan. This is called the object relative embedded sentence in linguistic terms. So brothers that sisters hug are good. So in this case, it's actually sisters who perform the action of hugging, right? So you have to indicate the sisters. So younger kids, like 7, 8-year-old kids, they have a tendency to always go back to the beginning. They have to override that urge to correctly indicate the gender of the actor. Okay, so that's a grammar test. Does that sound clear, everybody? Good. Next slide. Okay, here's a rhythm discrimination test. So we had this kid-friendly version of the test. So here what happened is they're sitting in front of a screen, and then they view this drum boy And then there's a short rhythm sequence coming up. And then after some delay, they're seeing another two characters, cartoon characters, either Sandy same or Doggy different. Sandy. What do you think here? Sandy, right? So if that's the same, then press the Sandy same button. If that's different, the Doggy different. Okay, so let's go through.
When you're talking, will you look at the camera and use those slides?
Oh, I see.
Because then the audience can see you.
Okay, it's good.
I mean, because you're looking back, but if you look there, well, I'll see you.
Okay, I'll stand here. How about that? It's good. Okay, so let's go through one practice trial. So here's one rhythm. Did you guys hear this?
Uh-huh.
Okay, and after some delay, oh, okay, so who thinks it's a Sandy same? Raise your hand. Okay, and who thinks it's a Doggy different? So you guys are right, it's actually different, right? So that's how we do. It's the same different judgment task. Okay, and then here's the next slide. Here's the result we got. So on the x-axis, we got the rhythm accuracy. On the y-axis, we got accuracy for language, percent accuracy. So as you can see, there is really strong positive correlation between the two task performance. What that means is kids who perform well on the rhythm, they can also perform well on the language task. And that is even true after you factor out their demographic variables, such as their age, or their gender, or their mother's education, called SES. So it still stays strong. And also working memory, cognitive factor. Okay, so so that study was published 2 years ago. Now, next slide. Yeah, right there. So what you see here, right, the finger moving, is what's called the spontaneous finger tapping task. Okay, so I want you to bring your finger, okay, not the middle one, but this one. And then I'm going to ask you to move your fingers at any tempo you're most comfortable with, but you have to move your fingers as consistently as possible, right? So what that does is that gives us the measure of a variability, how consistent you are. We can also measure the tempo rate, right? How fast or how slow, right? So we can get those metrics out of this spontaneous finger tapping task. Okay. Now I've just shown you the correlation between rhythm discrimination and the grammar performance. Now, if I would say, by measuring your finger tapping rate or your variance, I can actually predict how good you are on your grammar task. How many of you believe? It's quite, there's one, right? Maybe how many would you believe? Few, right? I asked this question a couple of years ago. There was 150 audience and 2 of them raised their hand. That means it's quite unintuitive, right? Connecting the dots between mere motor task and seemingly high level grammar performance. Next slide. You can go, next slide. Yes, and this is what we got, okay? On the x-axis, we got the variance, right? So the bigger the variance, meaning that they're not consistent. Y-axis, we have another type of grammar task called the grammatically judgment task. And you see this negative correlation out of 97, this time healthy young adults. They're mostly UTD undergrads. Okay, so we established this recently. All right, next slide. So the question is then, if you practice music on a daily basis, then is there any long-term effect or long-term benefit of a music training on other domains, such as speech, language, and the cognitive functioning? And the answer will be yes. Okay, so here you see the bar graphs. So across all the age spans, whether school-age children or young adults or old adults, musicians outperform non-musicians on the speech and noise perception test. Okay, and not only that, next slide. they also outperform on auditory working memory tests, musicians. Did a better job than non-musicians throughout the lifespan. Okay? So there's this benefit of long-term music training on cognitive and speech and language functioning. Okay. All right, so are we good so far? Sound clear? Okay, so I guess we'll take the Q&A later, so I'm not gonna ask question now. You guys, what question?
One quick question. I thought math was also, been measured to improve for musicians.
Yes, yes. Right. That's true. Yeah, there's a lot of overlap between math and music, in fact, right? And every music frequency is actually mathematically, right? They're all well organized, right? So for example, relative ratio of pitch in one song will be preserved even if it's transposed to other key. So there's a lot of a connection between math and music.
But it's almost like music that has a beat to it is what's more related to it than just any music. Like,
Yes.
I mean, it's just like you just did it generically, or are you a musician and then this measure?
Yeah, because pretty much no matter what you play, what instrument you play, that involves rhythm. Actually, as Dr. Chapman pointed out, it's not like a music in general. We'll be actually learning more about the functional or therapeutic role of a rhythm, specifically rhythm. Okay, so that would be a nice segue towards the next slide.
Then you think rap music is really good.
Yes. Right, but any music actually that involves rhythm, that's helpful. That's what we learned so far. Okay, so that actually is a nice segue towards the next topic, which is a clinical application of the music. All right. Now, I'm sure many of you heard about this tragic story of Gabby Gifford about 10 years ago, right? When she was giving a public speech in Tucson, Arizona, there's a gunman there shooting everybody, and there are quite a few victims, including children. And this is actually a screenshot of several breaking news where they reported that she got killed. Now, next slide. So miraculously, actually, she survived. Gabby Gifford, right after the brain surgery, she got a headshot behind her, and the bullet went through her left hemisphere, which destroyed her language system. So she permanently lost her speech fluency, which could be a devastating loss as a politician. Now, if you look at her video clip these days in YouTube, I mean, she is remarkably fluent. She gains a lot of speech fluency. Now, next slide. I'm going to show you this little video where Gabby started receiving speech therapy. Okay, so play.
You're going to do this. You ready? This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine.
Remember, at this point, she couldn't say the word light. Suddenly, there she was, singing that word and a whole lot more.
I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Excellent.
Okay, so next slide. As you just watched this video, she couldn't say the word light, but she was able to sing that word, right? So that's the phenomenon that has been reported and has been observed over the last 200 years. We still don't exactly know how that happens, the underlying mechanism yet. And we're actually trying to unravel that with the NIH project in my lab. Anyhow, so based upon that phenomenon, in the 70s, people developed this speech therapy protocol called melodic intonation therapy, or acronym MIT. It's not school in the East Coast, right? But in this context, it's MIT means melodic intonation therapy. Now, in this cartoon, what you're seeing here is on the left side, the speech therapist is holding a hand of a gentleman who's supposed to be a patient. What they're doing is they're singing together while they're tapping along with the intact left hand, right? So what we used to believe is melody is the primary primary factor or major ingredient, if you will, and the rhythm is kind of secondary to that, right? That's why I got this name, melodic intonation therapy. Now, next slide. But recently, people have shown that it could be actually rhythm that drives the speech fluency, not so much melody. Okay, so in this study, what they did was they compared 3 different lyrics, but in 2 different ways from the same basic patients. One using rhythmic speech, another one using singing. And what they showed here is that regardless of different lyrics, both rhythm and singing yielded comparable speech fluency. Okay, so that was reported about 10 years ago. And I was quite inspired by that finding because I had also long been suspecting it could be rhythm, not melody. Next slide. So again, inspired by that, those recent findings, I decided to devise this new rhythm therapy protocol. So let me just quickly walk through this. So it consists of 4 different phases, okay? So in the first phase, patients learn how to tap. No speaking, nothing, they just learn how to tap until they get the hang of it, right? We teach different rhythmic patterns, which you'll see in the next slide. And then once they get the hang of it, then we introduce a short single word like a hi, okay? And then they try to get the word out with the tapping, okay? Once they master, then the next phase, they learn how to speak longer phrase or sentence, such as I love you, how are you, along with the tapping, okay? And then once they fully master, then in the final phase, this is what we want them to do in their daily life. They can speak without tapping, but they can utilize the rhythmic pattern in the head. Does that make sense? Got the idea? All right, next slide. So now that is actually implemented as an app called the Speech Hero. And we've been developing this app in collaboration with a company in California. And last year, we finished the feasibility testing NIH project. Now we're waiting on the second phase full clinical trial SBIR grant. Anyhow, as you can see here, this game is actually gamified therapy. This guides you through what to do, okay? So the phase 1, tapping, and then you tapping with the speaking, and then later on, you're speaking without tapping. Okay? And then they will see this analytic on a daily basis. Next slide. So before we actually even devise this full functional therapy app, we carried out case study with a patient who was back then 62-year-old female native English speaker. She had a huge lesion on the left hemisphere called the left MCA stroke. Okay, and this black part right there is all lesion part of that tissue. Okay, and she was heavily phasic, meaning that she couldn't get the word out. But interestingly enough, there's only one word she could speak fluently, which is time. So when I first met with her, she tried to introduce herself with that one word time, but I was able to guess actually she was trying because instead of saying her name is Debbie, instead of saying my name is Debbie, she was saying time, right? So with the context and everything, yeah, she's trying to introduce herself. And she used that time, and her prosody is preserved. So it was remarkable to see her communication. Anyway, so there was only one word left. For some reason, that was time after stroke. Okay, next slide. All right, so after we enrolled her, we taught her a set of different rhythmic patterns that all correspond to different phrases, such as I love you, right? So it would be I love you, Bob, Bob. I love you, Bob, Bob, okay? Or I need a drink, that's a triplet. I need a drink, Bob, Bob. I need a drink, Bob, Bob. Or hi there, Jamie. Jamie is her daughter's name, so we decided to teach that phrase. and so forth. Okay, so you got the idea, right? So, but that's like a step-by-step manner. Okay, all right, next slide. So in this study, this is a design. So there's a baseline, and there's a pre-testing and post-testing, and there's an 8-week interval in between. Okay, so during the baseline and pre-testing, there's no intervention, no therapy. We just wait. And right before she begins her first therapy session, we got her MRI data and her behavioral assessment. Okay, and then thereafter, she received this therapy twice a week over 8 weeks long. And then each therapy takes about 1 hour. But we also gave her homework so that she can actually practice at home. So it's almost daily practice. And she worked very hard. She was very determined. And after that, we again, we got her MRI and behavioral assessment. Okay. All right, next slide. All right, so instead of me going on and on and on, let me just show you this video clip. All right.
I came back to life or whatever. I would have loved to see that kind of character. Not really like she wasn't really like a Sakura character, but she was kind of like high five. Yeah, she was badass.
First step.
She was really cool.
Rhythm only, and she was very happy.
She's the best Naruto. Okay. Fair. And if Kurama was a lady, I think Kurama would also have been best girl. I don't know if I have best girl in Naruto.
I saw you. You were gonna.
First time she ever said hi after she had a stroke.
Shizu, how are you?
So excited and emotional.
How you doing? Are you feeling
She
better?
actually cried on
How
the
was your
day.
weekend?
Alright, let's keep going.
We had to pause about
Shout out.
15
Go
minutes.
follow Shizu.
Now, next phase, you learn longer phrase.
What were you doing? What were you doing? Oh, last time it was Dying Light. Did you stream recently?
Now, this is where the prototype of a therapy comes in.
Man, I really wanted to.
To guide through for therapy.
Even as a kid, I knew what was happening. I'm a slacker. No, it's fine. Take the time to get better.
Yeah, towards the
and, like,
end,
regain
the difference was
energy.
very much. She learned so much.
I can't imagine. Luckily, you know what? Knock on wood. I haven't been. I still haven't gotten COVID, and I'm kind of surprised because I feel like I should have gotten it by now, but I haven't.
Yeah, she was able to read, so every time she sees the prompt of "I love you," she's like, "Oh." And "I love you" it was her big hit actually. One day, I mean, we got all the amazing stories and testimonial. She said "I love you" to her nursing practitioner one day, out of blue, and the nurse practitioner got shocked. Oh my God, what happened to her? And she said "I love you" to her daughter, her granddaughter. It was really, really touching to hear all this story. Anyhow, so after she successfully finished the therapy, again, we got her behavioral and the MRI data. It's too bad that it's cut here, but it's some of the speech and language assessments, and where you see, so this is actually baseline, pre and post. Okay, you got that right? Baseline, pre, post. And you see this increase, but the degree of the increase was actually bigger between pre and post compared to between baseline and pre-testing. So that you could say that's kind of spontaneous recovery, but you see the bigger increase between pre and post. And she also learned 42 words in total across 16 different sentences, such as "I love you," "Hi there, Jamie." Okay, so that's a behavioral data. Next slide. Okay, so this is what's called diffusion tensor imaging. On the right side, this pretty graph, the brain figure. Here, different colors. That's just indicating X, Y, Z direction, nothing special. But now, what it shows is the white matter tract. Okay, white matter tract in the brain. The reason why you see nothing here is because of the dead tissue. There's nothing in there. Okay, so we were able to still get the remaining LIFG. That stands for left inferior frontal gyrus, also known as Broca's area. And there are two homologue parts on the right side, right inferior frontal gyrus, and RPSTG stands for right posterior superior temporal gyrus. Okay, so that's that. And then on the left side, what we see here is a bar graph comparing the degree of a brain plasticity. So don't worry about this metric called FA times RD. So that's just a metric showing the degree of white matter tract increase. And here's what happened, right? In the original site, left IFG, you see a slight decrease of brain plasticity, white matter tract. In contrast, if you look at the right side, both right IFG and the right posterior STG, you see the increase of white matter tract, right? In other words, the brain plasticity. So what could have happened is, over the course of our therapy, the brain on the right side, which is the intact side, took over the language function, which enabled her to speak better. Okay? Whereas the original side is kind of dying down. Now, obviously, this is from one patient. So, I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, but that's kind of consistent with existing theory, right? The brain plasticity, the intact side, has a tendency of takeover functioning from the damaged part. So now to test this more, we actually, right now, we're carrying out a rhythm therapy clinical trial using the NIH funding. Okay. So does that sound clear so far? Any other questions? Okay, all right, then let me switch the gear, and then I'd like to talk a little bit about the music intervention for Alzheimer's disease, which I'll be starting this year with another funding called Aware DAOs funding mechanism. Okay, so I'm sure many of you actually heard or even experienced this by seeing your grandmother, grandparent, or parents. For some reason, Alzheimer patients, when they listen to their favorite tunes, all of a sudden, their memory comes back. They begin to recognize their loved ones, their family members, and then they can respond yes, no question quite quickly, right? And because of that phenomenon, actually, OTs and PTs, they're actually using this music. They give iPod or some music player to the patients that have a list of all the favorite songs. And there's even a documentary about that called Alive Inside. If you haven't watched that, I highly recommend it. It talks all about this power of music for Alzheimer's patients. Okay, next slide. So we came up with this idea. Okay, so let's provide the music to them, but that music is actually quite individualized music. What I mean by that is any music that every individual patient likes. So it doesn't matter what genre that might be. It could be rock, could be jazz, could be classic, doesn't matter. Whatever music that they were really attached to throughout their life, especially their teenager time, the music has a really strong nostalgia effect. Plus, so it's not just the music per se, it's actually engineered music. So what we're doing is we're integrating binaural beats with personalized music. Okay, so I'm sure some of you may have heard the binaural beats before, some of you may have not, but it's really one of those things very popular amongst the youngsters and teenagers these days. If you go to YouTube and then type binaural beats, you'll see a bunch of actually videos, so many counts and viewers. Anyway, so we're actually developing this app. We were developing this app last year throughout. First in collaboration with actually undergrad UTD capstone team. They did a phenomenal job, and we had this weekly meeting. Now the app is actually ready. It's in my phone right now, but there's some screenshot there. So users download this in the Android or Apple, and then they can actually choose the type of problem they have, either anxiety, memory, or attention. But right now we're only testing their language and cognitive, which has to do with the memory. And then we actually leverage existing third-party music software such as Spotify or Apple Music. And then music has a functionality of finding preferred songs for each individual, right? So I have my Spotify. The weekly music that I listen to is completely different than one of my grad students are listening to, right? So it doesn't matter what music that is, but that music will be actually seamlessly combined with the binaural beat, okay? So I actually have a sample here, but I'm not sure if you actually clearly see this. Here it is. The next slide. Okay, so here's a little bit about binaural beat. So the way how it works is we play two frequencies, okay, two sinusoidal frequencies. One is fed into the left, another one is fed into the right. Okay, and then they're actually slightly different in terms of their frequency. So there's a slight mismatch. Now, brain gets confused. What's going on? Why am I listening to two different frequencies? The way the brain compromises that is by generating a third illusory frequency, over sound, that is actually has some significant role in modulating some part of the brain. Okay, next slide. So here we have a 440 and 400, right? So that means you get 40 hertz illusory sound. Now, depending on modulating that difference, right, mismatch, net difference in left and right frequency, you can actually target different frequencies in the brain. It could be gamma, theta, alpha, theta, and depending on what frequency you're targeting, then you have different cognitive outcomes. Okay, next slide. So recently, there's a meta-analysis summarizing all the binaural beat studies. There's a table actually listing what frequency that they use, whether it's alpha, beta, gamma, and what kind of cognitive or psychological functioning that they're targeting, such as anxiety problem or memory, attention, and whatnot. Okay, so this meta-analysis. So what that suggests is that this binaural beat is now really there's an increase of a study. And then it recently began to show up in some major high-profile journals too. So it's pretty encouraging. Next slide. Okay, so before we actually give the app to the patient for the clinical trial, we wanted to test if this music, right, not just playing music, but music plus binaural beat, would that ever work? Right, so to do that, we wanted to test that with young, healthy participants. Okay, so we had 80 young adults. They're mostly UTD undergrads, and there are 4 different conditions. Okay, so one condition, there's a music, and then there's a binaural beat with a theta. Okay, theta beat or beta beat or gamma, right? And then as a control, there's the music only. That's a pure music, no binaural beat. So after they just passively listen to any of those. And then they immediately perform the language test. And then this is actually repeated, okay? And then that's it. Next slide. Oh yeah, actually we just played the sample sound, but it's too quiet, so just move on. Yeah, so the task that they're doing is called the grammatical judgment task, okay? So let me have one of the audience read it for me. Jessica, would you like, well, we have 2 Jessicas here. So this Jessica, why don't you read this?
Every month, the volunteers that babysit the baby cleans the bookcase.
So they listen to this, and then their job is to judge whether this is grammatically correct or incorrect. Right? It's actually quite difficult even for the native speaker. So are they correct or incorrect? It's wrong, right? Because it's supposed to be clean instead of cleaned, right? Because it's a plural, right? But that goes really quickly, so they really have to pay attention to it, okay? Next example. Okay, another Jessica, please.
Last year, the girls that the professors teach drop a vase.
Now, this is tense issue, right? This is a past tense, right? Last year, but you see there's a verb drop, that's a present tense. So there's a mismatch between this adverb and this verb, right? So this is wrong. It should be what? Dropped, right? Wow. They have to pick up dropped.
That's tricky.
I know, right? It's a pretty tricky, and it's actually, there are quite a few undergrads who completely fail. Anyway, so keep going, next slide. All right, so here's the result that we got. So what happened is actually, no matter what frequency of binaural beat was added, the group who were primed by music plus binaural beat, they all show increased, like better performance on this grammatically judgment test, okay? Compared to music only condition. So we were a little surprised. Wow, doesn't matter what kind of binaural beat frequency you're actually targeting. So what we did was next, we did a proof of concept EEG experiment, which is really simple actually. It's called the resting state EEG. So they come in and then they sit down 10 minutes and then we play binaural beat. We use beta or pure tone, right? That doesn't have any binaural beat, it's just a simple pure tone. So 10 of them actually listen to binaural beat. The other 10 listen to just pure tone. And then after that, we get their resting state EEG signals. Again, there's nothing in there, they're just passively sitting down. So we wanted to compare what changes in the brain in between, right? In between that binaural beat priming, right? So post versus pre, right? Does that make sense? Okay. And here's what we got actually. So on the x-axis, we got the frequency, right? All the frequency ranges, theta, beta, gamma, and so forth. And the y-axis is the coherence value. So that is an index of functional connectivity in the brain, across all the brains, right? So we have this confusion matrix and all the data. It's a little busy and a little overwhelming, but let me just unpack this a little bit. So across all the brain areas, frontal, central, parietal, temporal, right? It's all pairwise comparison. And then you measure this functional connectivity between two regions in the brain. And here, the red color is a binaural beat, okay? So above, the positive value indicates there's an increase of functional connectivity after you listen to the binaural beat. If you see the minus sign, that means there's a decrease of functional connectivity after your prime bar. So can you notice a pretty clear difference between binaural beat and control, right? Overall, binaural beat shows increase of coherence afterwards, after you're primed by binaural beat. Whereas if you're primed by control tone, overall, there's a decrease of functional connectivity, which actually makes sense, right? You get tired, you lose your attention, but for some reason, binaural beat actually still holds your brain tight. In fact, it actually shows increase of functional connectivity, but it's actually in a non-specific way. So that kind of goes hand with the behavioral data that we got, right? No matter what frequency you're primed by, you see this improvement. So that's what we got. Now, okay, so let's wrap it up. What time is it?
10 minutes to the hour.
Wow. So let me just go quickly. All right, so where are we heading to? Now, this idea of music as medicine, right, it has been around for many, many, many decades. And I'm sure that some of you actually have your own strategy and own regimen to use music, right? Now, but this topic is inherently very, very difficult to be studied scientifically, right? Because the music is such a subjective thing. The music that works for me, that doesn't work for you, right? There's huge individual differences. So it's inherently very difficult. Now, but, we never gave up, and there's an increase of evidence. So next slide. NIH recently, finally, they determined to support this research by providing funding, right? They recently launched a mechanism called Sound and Health Initiative. Okay, so we're actually in a very, in a moment, it's a really time of excitement because we got a massive computing power, right? Our UTD has a really phenomenal supercomputer system. Next slide. And we have a really high resolution neuroimaging technique. This is a slice of a brain in the 7T data, high resolution. Next slide. This is MRI brain scanner. Next slide. Yeah, this is even smaller portable version of a neuroimaging. So you can actually semi-real-time way track down the brain activity, right? It looks almost like a headset. Next slide. Oh, kind of stop. Next slide. Yeah, this is probably the most important thing to say. Now, the field is getting more interdisciplinary. And to address this question of how music works, you really have to take a interdisciplinary approach. And our UTD, our BBS, Center for Brain Health, we are the place to do this. So I'm very proud of being here, actually. So next slide. Okay, so with that, I want to acknowledge my fantastic lab research team. A little bit of cut off here, and my funding agencies down there. Okay, next slide. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, so much. We now have time for questions, both from the in-person audience here, as well as a few from our online audience. We've had so many questions coming in. We're gonna spend an hour and still couldn't get through them all. There's been so many, so good. So would you like to take a couple questions from the audience?
Yes,
and I will then...
happy to. All right.
So with the binaural beats, does it have to be a passive listening to see that effect, or like similar to the tapping in the speech language pathology section? Could your SLP just be playing binaural beats on a Zoom call through while they do the section and you train that?
Okay, the question is whether it's binaural listening is kind of passive listening, or could you actually combine it with active rhythm tapping? That's a good question. Right now, it's a passive listening. They listen to the binaural beat. But again, the reason why we combine binaural beat with the music is if you listen to binaural beat for an hour, it's actually torturing yourself. It's pretty painful. Actually, I've been doing that myself to test out this app. So it's a passive music listening, but you can enjoy the tune. But I think that's certainly a good idea. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Amy. We have an online question from Eileen who asks, some people have rhythm and some don't over their lifetime. Do we know if people without rhythm, such as myself, are predisposed to Parkinson's disease?
That's a great question. The answer would be probably no, but I'm not aware of any study actually. So arrhythmia, that's called. But there's a strong connection between rhythm deficit and speech language deficit. So for example, people with dyslexia or developmental language disorder, they're not tone deaf. They're in tune, but they're what we call their off time, right? They're really bad at rhythm, timing, intonation, judgment. So as I've shown you today, there is a great connection between their rhythm skill and language skill, but I don't know if that is actually implying the prevalence or risk of Parkinson's disease. I'm not aware of it. Question?
Yeah, so I haven't investigated very much, but every binaural beat study I've seen compares binaural beats to music or ambient sound. It compares it to another sound. I'm wondering why I personally haven't seen it. Has it been done being compared to silence? Because if we're looking at it like as an intervention, it's potentially binaural beats versus nothing, versus instead of typically see binaural beats versus ambient sound or music.
Yeah. So I mean, so the question is whether why should we compare binaural beat to another type of sound rather than comparing to silence, right? So silence, that's what we call lower baseline, if you will, right? Whereas listening to some other non-binaural beat it could serve as active control. So they have to listen to something, but that's not binaural beat, but some other sound. That way you can match their condition of listening. Whereas between listening, binaural beat, and silence, you have quite a few differences, right? One is listening condition, another one is non-listening condition. Very difficult to tease apart. If you see any effects, is that because listening to something or listening to binaural beat? Does that make sense? Question, Sandy?
So do you think, two questions, listening to music helps your speed of processing? So like even the e-gamers might be able, because it does something with kind of seeing things quickly and responding. And then the second question is people that can't dance, do you think if they sat and listened to music and tell them that they could dance better? We look at the Parkinson's patients that couldn't dance now. Oh, they're kind of dancing smoothly. So two questions.
Yes. So again, the reason why
Speed of processing.
the question is, by listening to music, could you dance better? Is that right? That's one question.
That's one.
Yeah. And the other question, the previous one was
Speed of processing.
speed of processing. Does music actually improve the speed of processing? I would say yes. The reason why I would say yes is because music, again, triggers dopaminergic system. And then you have, again, shot of dopamine, right? Shot of dopamine, explosion of your dopamine in your head. That actually has effect on your motor skills, right? So after you listen to music, Parkinson's patients actually, as we watch the video, they walk better, or they can speak better too, because that's because of this temporary increase of dopamine release. Or alternatively, we also think that might allow patients to bypass this damaged basal ganglia, instead utilize alternative mechanism through cerebellum. So there's these two competing theory, but I didn't get to that yet. But in general, you get to see increase of response, right, motor response, and then they can dance better. Then.
Yeah, I wonder if you could comment on when you listen to new music, it's often unfamiliar, you don't enjoy it, you hit a point where you really enjoy it.
Yes.
Then over time, it sometimes becomes stale in your mind, yet really well learned. I wonder if there's an element of therapeutic value in either the novelty, which I would imagine would simulate more dopamine, versus the more sort of automatedness that where your brain is probably very wired into it in advance. I can imagine both having that.
Right. So the question is, music has both novelty effect and also familiarity effect. Well, which is true, and both work nicely. So novelty effect, when you are exposed to something novel, new music, but that really you're tuned to it, then you have a dopamine release in your head, in your reward system. But also the familiar music that you were so tuned to during your teenager period, or your earlier time, anytime in your life, when you are exposed to that kind of music out there, then again, that also gives you the pleasure, right? So that's what actually really helped the Alzheimer's patients. When they listen to their 60s and 70s in their prime time, that really boosts them up, and all of a sudden they seem to wake up from Alzheimer's, and then they behave like a normal people. But then that's gone. So that's the tricky part. The question is, how can we actually sustain this effect of the music listening or music activity? We're still trying to find the answer for that.
All right, we're gonna take one last question from our online audience. We're at the time here. There's so many great questions. Carol asks, is there any research on music therapy for treating depression?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So again, when I talked about dopamine, right? Lack of dopamine gives you depression and also motor difficulty. That's because of the role of dopamine in different ways. So you can actually really promote this, what's called the reward system in the brain through music, that in turn has positive clinical effect on reducing depression. But also in the Binaural B table, the meta-analysis that I showed you briefly, people use Binaural B to reduce anxiety and depression too.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Lifelong brain health. This is our shared mission. Thank you, Dr. Lee. I personally learned so much from your talk. I loved your research. It's so cutting edge. diffusion tract imaging, behavioral measures, clinical interventions, apps. It's fantastic. I want to turn to talking about the Brain Health Project. The power of research truly lies in how we use research to make the world a better place. And I think your research is clearly doing that.
Thank you.
We have launched a large-scale landmark study called the Brain Health Project, which will help people everywhere get proactive about and maintain and improve their brain's health and performance. If you're interested in learning more about the Brain Health Project and possibly participating in it, please scan the QR code on the screen now with your phone or visit thebrainhealthproject.org. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next time on April 29th with Dr. Matthew Robison from UT Arlington. Thank you.